All right, guys, this is Mr. Anmatsu coming to you with Constitutionalism in Western Europe, specifically in the country of England. So this is part two of what we call the English Civil War. I know that Mr. Procopio, how many more times can I say the word Sorry about that. I know it's super annoying. Anyways, I know that Mr. Procopio already gave you guys part one. There's the again, which begins with Charles James the First and Charles the First, and we're kind of picking up that story. So we have Charles the First here, and let's go ahead and let's go ahead and get into this stuff. I don't really need to provide any context because this is just ongoing story from Mr. Procopio's part one. So we have an immediate cause. Charles basically tries to go to Parliament and arrest some of what we call the Puritans that are causing him a little bit of an issue. But over a crowd of over 4,000 citizens come out. And what we're starting to see is the citizens are starting to reflect the wants and needs of parliaments as well. Because of that, he begins to create an army and declares a war. And from there, we basically get two different groups. So the first group is the Cavaliers. A Cavalier is somebody that's on horseback. These guys were well-trained knights. But who are supporting the Cavaliers? It's basically the clergy, the Anglican Church, the old Catholic Church that are trying so hard to get some of their rights back. We got what we call conservative or old wealth. These are the guys who were nobles. Their grandfather were nobles. We probably call these guys nobles of the sword, rather than the nobles of the robe, who are these new nobles. So these guys would be nobles of the sword. Irish Catholics, they're concerned that Puritanism and Anglicanism may come over to Ireland and force them to become Anglican or Puritan rather than staying Catholic. The next group that we have is the Roundheads, and these guys are the Calvinists. These guys are probably supported by most of the Puritans in Parliament at this time, and they're totally against the king. Again, it says here Puritans, the Scottish Church in Scotland, where Presbyterianism and Jock Knox has go ahead and spread his ideas of Presbyterianism all throughout Scotland. And again, here we see a lot of what we call the bourgeoisie, the middle class. It's not the old wealth that's been wealthy because my grandfather was wealthy and my great-grandfather was a noble. These are people who have just started their businesses, just become merchants. They've gotten super, super wealthy and are now calling themselves nobility as well. So you guys could kind of theoretically call these guys nobles of the robe a little bit more. But really the nobles of sword and robe is primarily done in France rather than anywhere else in Europe. But anyways, just to give you an idea of something that these guys would be called nobles of the robe in England at this time. So there you go. Again, more nobles and support the Navy. Who is the leader of the Roundheads? This guy called Oliver Cromwell. And Oliver Cromwell is incredibly Puritan. He's the military leader of the Roundheads. He creates the New Model Army. So the New Model Army are the Roundheads who are against the Cavaliers, who are obviously, and Oliver Cromwell would be against, obviously, Charles the First. So there's a battle. You guys can figure that out. But basically, Charles surrenders to the Scots in this battle. There's a division between these two. Parliament orders the army disband. Cromwell says, heck no, I have the power. I have control. We're doing pretty well. We're defeating the king. Why the heck would we disband the order? And because of that, we get something called the Pride's Purge. And people in this new model army, frustrated that Parliament has just ordered the army to go away, even though this is the army that protected Parliament, even though this is the army that defeated the king, there are people in the new model army going, well, obviously, Parliament doesn't really care too much about us. So without Cromwell's knowledge, they basically forced through warfare and through violence all of the non-Puritans and Presbyterians from Parliament. And what does this leave? Only 20% of the people are left. 80% of the people have been kicked out, and we call this a rump parliament. So what was the purpose of this? Well, probably the new model army and probably Cromwell at certain levels were so frustrated that Parliament would take away the power, they just said, you know what, I'm going to kick out everybody out of Parliament who's not going to agree with me. And so this is what I would call maybe a fake Parliament, because it's not really a Parliament voted by the people and created by the people. It's only 20% of the people that would agree with Cromwell and the new model army. So what do? Look at this next note. They behead him. So with this new parliament that is pretty much supported by Cromwell and the New Model Army, they behead Charles I. And what's interesting is this is the first king in European history to be executed by his own subjects. We're going to see an ongoing kind of action of beheading kings that's happening. But really, this is a novel moment because novel mean new. A novel moment because that's the first time this has ever happened. And this is going to set the stage for multiple what we call regicides, the killing of a king. Regal mean royalty, and side mean to kill. So it's going to set up a bunch of regicides up into the future. Kind of an interesting moment. When this happens, obviously there's divisions within each group. And so we have some new people called, one of them called are the Levelers. These guys are radical religious revolutionaries, kind of like the Anabaptists. They are seeking social and political reforms for a more equal society. So they're going beyond just freedom of worship. They're probably going almost freedom of wealth, that pretty much people should start getting paid very similarly. They're probably starting to advocate for man's voting rights and representation in parliament. Probably not women's, but that's kind of where they're going. They're kind of a little bit more radical. You call these guys liberals. The Diggers are an interesting group, other than the fact that they're kind of wanting no parliament involved. So I kind of come with the idea of localization. In other words, that the individual towns and cities should be able to run themselves rather than a big parliament stuck in London who's trying to control all of them. And also they're believing in private ownership of land. So I definitely would say that these guys are probably nobles who have the land already. Lastly, we have the Quakers. You should know William Penn was a famous Quaker. He created a state called Pennsylvania after his name. Also on the oatmeal box, you'll see a picture usually of this guy, like a Quaker, a guy with a black hat and a little tie. They believed in inner light, kind of like Martin Luther believes. He believes that each person has their own ability to basically save themselves. So they reject church authority. You don't need a priest. You don't need a king. You don't need a bishop to go to heaven. They're pacifists, which means peace, man. So they don't really are into violence. They'd rather have peace rather than war, and believe that any argument can probably be solved in peaceful ways rather than using violent ways. And just like Luther did, allowed women to play a limited role in preaching. So I guess Luther didn't do that, but you know what I'm saying, just that women's jobs was inside the home was to preach, and so they have a little bit more of a role in preaching. So now that we don't have a king, what do we call this government? Is it a monarchy? Is it a constitutional monarchy? Well, we don't have a king, so we can't use the word monarchy, that's for sure. So they call this the interregnum. I call it the interruption, or I call it the intermission is another way to think about it. Watch my hands right now. I kind of think of this moment as the intermission between two of the, actually four of the Stuarts. So you got James I, you got Charles I, then there's an intermission, and then we get Charles II and James II. So I'll be talking about those guys later, Charles II and James II. Mr. Hamamatsu, who's Charles I again? I know, there's a lot of Charles. He's the one that just died. Okay, so now we're in the middle part, and in the middle part, the intermission or the interregnum. Who's going to take power? Well, the only guy that has power right now, the leader of the New Model Army, Oliver Cromwell. So you're beginning to notice some kind of interesting moment that Oliver Cromwell became the leader of the military power. He gets rid of a lot of people in Parliament, and now he's basically created himself the king. Yep, he's turned this basically into a dictatorship. So this time is called Rule Without a King because Oliver Cromwell did not crown himself a king. But basically what they did is they got rid of the Stuart dynasty. They got rid of the House of Lords. In England, we have this thing called Parliament. Just like in America, we have this thing called Congress. And just like in America, we have two different groups inside of Congress, one being the House of Representatives, which have like 335 members or so. These guys are only voted for 2 years. These guys are seen like a little bit more as, I don't want to say the word uneducated, but a little bit more unprofessional as being politicians. Then you got the senators. The senators are there for 6 years. There's only 2 per state, so there's 100 of them. And these guys are seen as more, I don't know, professional about politics. Well, that was kind of true of England as well. Going back to England right here, there was called the House of Lords and the House of Commons. Obviously, the House of Lords would be kind of like our Senate. It's kind of like the more upper class, so a little bit more professional, whereas the House of Commons was full of more of the lower and middle classes and a lot more people, and they're trying to figure out many different ideas. So with that, what they did is during this time called the Commonwealth, they got rid of the king. Well, obviously they already did. They killed him. And more importantly, they got rid of the House of Lords. So basically, what did England become? A military state. It was controlled by the military with Oliver Cromwell at the rule. And anyways, I guess Scottish Presbyterians start freaking out that Cromwell is even taking control because they're scared of Charles. They want Charles II to be the new king, and he invades them and goes and defeats them and kills them and goes, so now what? And everybody's like, okay, fine, you're the king. So when that happens, he calls himself now the Protectorate. And who's protecting, England? No better than Lord Protector himself, Oliver Cromwell. So he gets rid of the entire rump parliament. So now there's no parliament. So there's no parliament. There's no king. He's a general in charge of all of the military, and now he's in charge of England. He turns England into 12 districts, each under control of a military general. He says, Anglicans and Catholics, I'm Puritan. You ain't getting any rights. But Jews, it's okay. Come back. We'll take care of you. So I don't know if he necessarily gives them rights. We're going to talk about that later in the Test Act. But he does allow the Jews at least to come back to England if they wanted to. So later you can talk about Cromwell's military campaigns, but basically Cromwell dies in 1658, and his son Richard was a horrible ruler. He was not ready to be king. Everybody can see through that. And so with that being said, Parliament actually comes back alive, even though they've been disbanded, because Richard has no control. So Parliament starts meeting again, and they go, hey, this guy Richard Cromwell, first of all, his dad wasn't a big fan, number one. Number two, this guy doesn't even know what the heck he's doing, man. We got to find a ruler that's going to start talking to people in Europe, because France is doing stuff, Spain's doing stuff, the Netherlands are doing things. We have to have a ruler that's going to talk to these people to figure things out. Because at this time, guys, kings would meet kings and talk and discuss and figure things out, just like we have presidents meet presidents. You don't just have normal people just show up and say, hey, can I talk to the president? I want to create a peace treaty. There has to be some authority. So Parliament's a little bit confused because their authority figure is not a good leader. His name is Richard Cromwell. He's not ready to go. And really, we don't have anybody what we call a legitimate king to go over to Europe to talk to them about some of the problems that Europe's facing that might come here to England. So Parliament looks to the left, they look to the right, they're like, God, we need a king. Where are all the kings? And this one guy goes, my name's Charles II. I'm a Stuart. I'm like, what? So he comes back. So the Stuarts come back. So after the death of Cromwell, we get Charles II. So Charles II comes back. This is why we call it the Restoration. What are we restoring? The monarchy. Restoring to make new again, the monarchy. And what's the name of the family? The Stuarts. And who's going to come? The Charles II and James II. So the Parliament, like I said, kind of gets power. He restores Charles II. Notice again that since Parliament is inviting the king, it's not like the king has any power. I'm sure Charles II wanted to go ahead and be king of England. I mean, it's a man. He wants to be king. He's from the Stuart family. His brother Charles I was a king of England. Why can't I be one? But the fact that he wasn't able to become one until he's invited kind of shows the power now of Parliament. This is not going to be true of all of Europe. Most of Europe is going to have a king that's not listening to anybody. But in England, we're starting to see this kind of weird thing pop up that we kind of have today with a president in Congress. Well, in their case, it's going to be a king in Parliament. And it looks like instead of the king having total control of Parliament, it looks like they're starting to become what we call more equals. And I'm sorry, I guess, you can see that by inviting Charles II. Basically Parliament is giving Charles II permission to go ahead and become king. And if you're given permission to become king, I bet you have to hook up Parliament somehow. And those are probably called rights and power. Okay. Just a heads up, this guy was not aggressive whatsoever. He probably learned the lesson of his brother Charles I, who was beheaded. He's probably like, yeah, I don't want to make these people too angry, so I'll make sure I'm the happy guy. So he's known as the Merry Monarch. A bunch of people show up. I don't know, we'll probably talk about this later, but now there are two groups. We have the Tories, which would be our modern day Democrats today. These guys are, what we call Republicans. These guys are the upper class. They have lots of money. They think that there should be a king that has total control over a parliament that gives rights. And again, here's that word conservative. Here we have what we call our Democrats today. They're like, no, 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 we want changes. We believe in religious toleration. Puritans should get that. Hey, business people should get some more economic rights, not be taxed so much. Not all of our money should go to the upper classes. Maybe we shouldn't be taxed at all. And again, here they are more liberal. You have the Clarendon Code. These are basically a bunch of actions made by the monarchists, by Charles the Second and James the Second. Basically, these acts were to address the issue of Catholicism and Puritanism. So the first one we have is Test Act of 1673, and it basically says this: if you don't pledge allegiance, which is in church taking the Mass or the Eucharist, the blood, wine, or the bread, the cracker body of Jesus, if you do not do that in the Church of England, then you're not allowed to vote, you're not allowed to have office, you're not allowed to preach, you're not allowed to teach, you're not allowed to attend universities, and you're not allowed to go to meetings. You better be Anglican, basically. So because of this, some of the Catholics are saying, hey, we want this too. We want freedom of worship for Catholics. And ultimately later, Parliament passes a habeas corpus act with them. And with this limits Charles's power. So they create the Test Act. In response to that, they say, you know what? We need to go ahead and limit the power. And you're going to see even more limits to his power. Next, Charles goes back and takes control of Scotland, and during the last, thousands are killed. Last few years of Charles' reign, Scotland was known as the Killing Time. Charles II dies, kind of leaving England again in this kind of violent time, and ultimately we got James II. And James II is going to really frustrate the Parliament because he's trying to return England back to Catholicism, full Catholicism, no Protestantism whatsoever. So because of that, the Parliament is going, you know what? We've invited these stewards, and now we have this James guy going super crazy about Catholicism. I don't know. I think we need a change. And here's a word for change, which is revolution. Revolution. Now, this is called the Glorious Revolution. I've also seen it called the Bloodless Revolution because basically that's what it was. There was a change, a dramatic change in the dynasty of who was controlling England, but not one drop of blood was spilt. And this was because it was done by Parliament. So when James issues a thing called the Declaration of Indulgence, which gives freedom of worship to Catholics, basically everybody's like, okay, we're going back to letting Catholics basically rule this place. And when he has an heir who is also Catholic, everybody's freaked out that, oh my God, Catholicism is coming back. The actions of Henry VIII and the Anglican Church, the ideas of Puritanism, the idea of Parliament, the idea of religious toleration are all going to go bye-bye. We're going to turn back into a Catholic state. So because of that, the Parliament says, you know what, you have to give up your throne, and they actually force him to do so. They abdicate his throne. So once again, Parliament's looking to the left, looking right, going, geez, we need a king. We didn't have a king with Oliver Cromwell and his son, Robert Cromwell. And then we got these two kings that basically were not that good. One was kind of cool. He was happy all the time. But the other one tried to make us all Catholic again, bringing us back to that problem with James the first time. What are we going to do? And they go, hey, somebody goes, hey, I think James has a couple of daughters, Mary and Anne, hey, and they're Protestant. That'd work out well. And everyone's like, dude, good idea. So Parliament invites Mary and his husband, who is the William of Orange. And if you're going, whoa, I've heard that name before. Yep, that's the same William of Orange, the same William the Silent that was in the Dutch revolt against Philip II in Spain. He's one of the guys that leads the Sea Beggars. He's the one that's in control, and this is how the Netherlands are now under the House of Orange, or the last name was of Orange. So with that being said, he gets invited, and they say, you know what? You guys can be on the throne. So not only is William of Orange controlling the Netherlands or the Dutch Republic, but he's also controlling England at the same time. As that happens, they're kind of, declared kings of King and Queen of England. But before they do that, obviously Parliament's going, but before you just become King and Queen, we need some things to check your power. So there are multiple things that they do to check the power. The first one's called the Bill of Rights. And like I said earlier, when they do this, we create what's called a constitutional monarchy. What a monarchy by itself is just a king and queen ruling. And who's making sure they don't do these different things or don't do right from wrong? Nobody. Why? Because the king has total control. But if you put a constitution in there or a document that tells you the rules of government, suddenly you create a constitutional monarchy. And those rules, not everybody, those rules that you set up in your constitution have to be followed by everybody, including the king. So you can see these provisions here, and you're going, except for the first one, kings could not be Roman Catholic. All of these, if you go all the way down here, go, whoa, those sound like our 10 Bill of Rights, aka the first 10 amendments of our Constitution. And you're absolutely right. And that's exactly what our Constitution does. It says, hey, yeah, government, you have some power, but there are some things that you can't do. We're going to call those things amendments that kind of check your power or tell you exactly what you can do and what you cannot do. Here, it's the same thing. Hey, laws can only make with the consent of Parliament. You can't have a king just doing his own thing. We should have right to free speech. Taxation was illegal unless it was approved by Parliament. No cruel and unusual punishment. So you're starting to hear a lot of the things that we have in our Bill of Rights here, and that's because we basically copied England. Kind of another note, because of this and Constitution, people are going to start thinking of this idea of democracy. That all people have rights and that all people should have these rights protected, not just if it's just put on the Bill of Rights. So it's kind of an interesting thing, and that's what this guy's talking about right here. One of the things that comes out of the Glorious Revolution in this peaceful change is like, man, people are reasonable, people can be taught, and people can actually know right from wrong. We're not just a bunch of selfish creatures just stealing power and robbing from each other. We're actually rational, reasonable teachers that are trying to do the right, reasonable creatures, that are doing the right thing. And he kind of comes up with an idea that, if we do the right thing, then government should do some right things. Here are the things that government should do. They should protect the natural rights of life, liberty, and property. Now, you're running, well, I've heard that before, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Yeah, because Thomas Jefferson just basically ripped off his ideas, basically copied and plagiarized ideas, changed it to pursuit and happiness. And there's a couple of interesting stories as to why he did that, but that's not for today, because this isn't U.S. history, this is European history. We also get the Toleration Act of 1689, which granted the right to worship for Protestant and nonconformists, like the Puritans and the Quakers, who were Anglican and were not getting the protections that they thought, although they could not hold office. Catholics, Jews, and other groups did not get these religious liberties, but they were probably left alone. They probably could practice in their house, but just not publicly. All right. And lastly, I'm not going to talk about this one because you kind of lose it. And these things we'll talk about later. So you guys can go ahead and stop right about here at the Toleration Act. So hopefully in this screencast, you kind of learned, well, from Procopio's string class, you kind of learned how James I and Charles I kind of set up an environment that resulted in what we call the English Civil War. Hopefully you know there's two sides, the Cavaliers and Roundheads, who were fighting each other and what they represented. Also, hopefully you understood how Charles II and James II didn't help the problem, caused more problem, and how there was a thing at the very end called the Glorious Revolution, or a change. A revolution just means a dramatic change. A dramatic change in the Stuart dynasty. And in fact, the Stuarts are bye-bye. And who's in their place? You're right. The House of Orange. Why? Who's in control? The King William of Orange. And hopefully you would know, here's my third hopefully, I guess, that William of Orange and Mary, William and Mary basically both make some agreements with Parliament, which create what we call our first constitutional monarchy. A monarchy that doesn't have absolute power, but is checked by a thing called the Constitution. All right, guys, we'll keep on working. Keep on asking great questions. Keep on doing your thing because your AP test date ain't moving. All right, guys, see you in class.